Thanks for joining us on Kirklees Local TV for your weekly wind-up program. On this show, we review and discuss the news and important issues that have a direct impact on our local community here in Kirklees. We aim to be informative, interesting, amusing, but definitely provocative. Please talk to us and let us hear your views. You can do so by email at info@kirkleeslocaltv.com and on Twitter at Weekly Windup. A very special welcome to our guests on today's show. We have a resident presenter, Councillor David Ridgway, and we have Philip Stevens with us today, a community volunteer. And you know the other person is our own Kirklees presenter, Kyle Warwick. Welcome to today's show.
Thank you, Pastor.
We are going to be discussing some very interesting topics: mental health in Kirklees and the service provision, sex and drugs, which seem to get the attention of everybody, and teenage pregnancy, one of the results of sex. So to start the show off, we're going to ask David, who is a counsellor, to let us know something about mental health and the provisions that are made readily available for all people who have challenges with their mental health here in our local community.
I go back to the days when mental patients were locked away from the community. And Margaret Thatcher, as Prime Minister back in the 1980s, had a programme of closing the mental institutions, or most of them, and bringing the patients back into the community on the basis that there would be support in the community for these people, and the mental hospitals, as they were called, could be used for other purposes. And the main mental hospital in Kirklees area was, of course, Stores Hall. Now, was it a good thing to do? To some degree, yes, it was, because there were many people who were more than capable of living useful lives within the broader aspects of the community. But of course, you cannot crack nuts with sledgehammers. And there were many people who were then thrown out of safe environments to live in the community where the care that was promised has not materialised in the manner that was expected. How's mental health supported in the community today? Well, the support is still there. I don't think we pay much attention to the manner in which the people who need it are able and capable of asking for it. I don't think there's as much education or empathy on behalf of the public at large that these people are our neighbours, sometimes our friends.
Here we want to bring in Kyle, because we've just got a brief history of the development and the progress that we have made since the days of Stores Hall. Now, Kyle, do you think bringing people back into the community as a form of rehabilitation, mental health patients, do you think it's working successfully? And if not, what are the drawbacks?
Well, I think what David said was right about the need for funding for services, and I think under the current coalition government that funding's been reduced, so the ability for the council to deliver those services has been hit massively, which I think has led to it being incumbent on the families or friends of people with mental health difficulties to help those people themselves. They can look for help, and to a certain degree there is help out there, but like you say, it's very difficult for a person suffering from mental health conditions living on their own to know where to access services from and what help they can get. And I think it's really about those outreach programs that the council should be having to identify people who do have mental health problems, and then using any money that they have as well to provide services for at least, you'd think once a week would be a minimum for somebody to be able to go out to somebody with mental health difficulties and make sure that the housing that they're in is clean and that they're receiving the right amount of nutrition and just basic quality of life things. And I think because of the way that council budgets have been slashed and the way that not just Stordsall but also St Luke's Hospital as well, which we're told now is going to be a housing estate, you know, they've been closed, and the people with mental health difficulties that were supported at those institutions have gone back into society, and then the budgets that were there to care for those people in society have been systematically slashed, and that's really fundamentally the problem with the care that Kirklees are able to provide. I don't think it's probably the care that they'd want to. Yeah. But it's what they're able to do with the funding that they receive.
And we've got Philip here, who is a community volunteer at the Mission, a local place here in Kirklees, where you will find a lot of people hanging out with mental health problems. From your experience, Philip, what can you say? Are we winning the rehabilitation program of having mental health people back in society? And are we prepared?
Well, from my experience, which I've experienced firsthand as well, I think to a degree we're making progress, but it's very slow. And like my two colleagues have said here, yes, they are doing so much, but there's much more that needs to be done.
Can I just add a comment here,
Go ahead.
Pastor? Kirklees gets a bad press because of the cuts in its budgets. It must always be remembered that the council budgets are being cut because the central government grant has been cut. And the central government grant has been cut because the money that was made available right up to 2010 is no longer available.
But haven't they just appropriated £100 billion for the renewal of Trident?
Well,
no,
yes.
They have they not?
Dave,
yes,
let's hear about it.
You're absolutely right. And I have to say, quite candidly, Kyle, that I am not a supporter of Trident and haven't been for over 30 years. But having said that, that £100 billion could be much better used for other stuff. Notwithstanding the fact that Britain is a frontline country in the protection of the wider world and the wider society within the world, and it is deemed necessary for Trident to be part and parcel of that. That argument is rather different to the provision for mental health,
which is what we want.
It all feeds into an economic situation. I mean, could we not ask the banks to pay some of the money back that they were paying?
Look, I won't take this. The banks have been given an enormously bad press.
Okay.
But without the banks, this country would not be running the manner in which it does do. It would not have the strength that we have within Europe. I read a most interesting article yesterday that if Britain came out of Europe, the whole European Union will collapse. And you're quite right, Kyle, to make the if you like, the incisive remark about finance. But the point is that Trident was still being funded by the last government, but nobody was sort of talking about getting rid of it then, and the one before that, and the one before that. But all of a sudden it becomes really important. And on top of all of that, Mr. Liam Byrne said that Liam Byrne said that we'd run out of money. As a Labour minister, to actually make that statement to an incoming government is pretty poor.
Well,
and that running out of money impacts massively on the subject that you brought to us today, Pastor, because obviously we would all want to do the best we can for those people who are capable of doing it for themselves. But I can't do with this continual griping about Kirklees Council can't do this and Kirklees Council can't do that because of the money. And although it's the easiest and it's trite to actually make the remark, it's a much bigger and a much wider situation. And the people who get caught up with this are always the old, the disabled and the young.
As you can see, when we have passionate politicians in the House, we can easily digress from discussing the main aspect. Now, just before we bring this aspect to a close, I just want to find out, do you think families are an important part of the rehabilitation process of every person who is now out of hospital.
They'll feel more at home having their families around them, and they won't feel intimidated or neglected to that degree. Whereas society, they take a different view. They tend to think that you brought it on yourself, so why should we pander to your needs, so to speak.
Well, if you are watching this program and anything that we have discussed is affecting you, please do not think you're on your own. Do not stay there and suffer on your own. Kirklees has adequate provision for mental health service. If you need any information, get in touch with the studio and we can give you. We're going for a short break now, but don't touch that button. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Kirklees Weekly Wind-Up service here in Kirklees Local Television. And our second topic for today will be based on sex and drugs. And I know that excites some people, but for some, it's like a downer. So here in the studio, we are going to be discussing it. How far do we go even for recreational purposes? Should the government legislate more on the use of drugs in sexual activities? Kyle, I think as a young man, I'm going to bring you in here just to hear your views on these.
Well, on the question of should government legislate more on the use of drugs in sexual activity, I think that's something that's extremely similar to alcohol. It's one of those situations where when you're taking a substance, your inhibitions are sort of dumbed down, and then as well your memory and recollection of situations may not be what it is. It's something that also is quite difficult to increase legislation on when drugs are just illegal. Illegal drugs are illegal, so you've committed a crime by taking the drugs. So it's one of those situations that's, I imagine, quite difficult to increase legislation on. Do people have the right do we have the right to stop people getting high? I think it's something that should be put to the public and be allowed for the public to decide on each individual case, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, a vote on each one, and it should be public opinion. I think you'd find then that there are certain substances that people would say absolutely no way, that should not be legal. There'd be others, I think, that they'd be more inclined to accept.
Right, so as a counsellor, David, the people in the sex industry who make their living on this, some of them have to use drugs because of the industry that they are in, and sex and all of that is part of what they do.
But you seem to know more about that than I do.
They do. As a pastor, I do. I have to counsel them and pick them up off the street. So as a politician, we want to know, do you think it's something that we should get stricter on, or we should just let people do?
I've been down the track of decriminalising drugs for a long time. I feel that it's quite wrong for the profits for illegal drugs to go into the pockets of a very few people, and I feel that if the whole process was decriminalised, then the profits would predominantly go into the buckets of the exchequer, and then the money would be there available for looking after the people who can't cope. If you take drugs on a recreational basis, whether or not it's legal or not, and you do it on a voluntary basis, then I would say that that is, in the broadest of terms, okay. However, if you are coerced into taking those drugs for whatever reason, that is obviously wrong. And I would consider that to be in court an assault, and the person who did it would have to pay whatever penalty they have to pay. Do we have a right to stop people being on a high? I would say, no, we don't. If people are drinking next door and they're on a high, it can be a considerable irritation to their neighbours, but it isn't your right to stop that. Nevertheless, I do feel that there is a need for far more education on this, not just education in schools, because I think we dump far too much of the society's ills on our teachers, but there's a need for education within the family, that the moral standards of living in modern life have got to be taught primarily from the parents.
Well, we'll give Kyle the last say, because some of you might be watching now and saying, well, I do pay my taxes, I do have the right to do what I want to do. What would you say to such people, Kyle, who is watching us?
Well, the law is the law at the end of the day, and if you're going to partake in illegal activity and you are caught for doing so, then you should expect to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I would say that I am an advocate in general of declassification, but I think if that was to happen, there would need to be an extreme amount of legislation that went beforehand, so that you didn't just end up with cartels of people that were illegally selling drugs before taking up the market. And it's all about how it's legislated to be rolled out, really, I think, for me.
That's right. Well, it's a daily thing that is happening in our society with the celebrities and their lifestyle. It's impacting on our young people. And we could be debating this all day long in the studio. If you're struggling with those views, make sure that you see somebody, a professional, who can help you. Well, we're moving on swiftly to our next topic, which relates very much to sex as well. It's teenage pregnancy. David, as a father and as a counselor, how do we positively help these young people to get back their life?
Young people, however much you are advising them, will not stop having sex. I seem to recall many years ago that it was actually quite good fun. But having sex also brings responsibility. I hear tales of girls who've had sex with boys who are unprotected, saying, oh, he didn't like to wear a condom. Well, I just feel that that is a totally unacceptable comment for any boy to make. To put all the pressure on the girls to take the pill or to take the morning after pill is unacceptable. For the pressure still to come from certain parts of society that if you want to get your own house, you've got to get pregnant and the council will look after you. All these things are in a mix where, sadly, again, parental influence on young people is lacking. And if a young lady is unfortunate enough, unless it was planned, to fall pregnant as a teenager, the first person that girl should go to is her mum. Now, some girls don't get on very well with their mums, but they do have other older female people, and they should go talk, listen, act, and go through with whatever it is that they want to do, whether it's a termination or whether it's to go to full term. It is certainly a matter for the girl. To have the pressure that's put on these girls to terminate a pregnancy simply because you're a teenager, I find very difficult to understand.
Lovely. Well, as a father, Philip, and as a community person, what are your views?
Well, it needs guidance, and normally you get that from your mother or your family around you. But sometimes teenagers today, they're very reluctant to adhere to advice that's given to them from their families, because sometimes they tend to think that they're being badgered into not doing something that they think that they've got the right to. You know, it's like I've had an experience where somebody's daughters come to me regarding situations of that nature, and I've said to them, that's the best place for you is at home with your mother or your family around you to give you that support that you actually require.
Well, it would appear, and if we put ourselves in those girls' position, and it seems that the emphasis is always on the female. Now, Kyle, what about the young men who are getting these young girls impregnated? What message can we send out to them? How can we help them?
I think also? It is, you're right about a level of responsibility, and I think to ask responsibility of people who, of a sort of section of society who are enjoying the the lack of the last vestiges of having very little responsibility is kind of naive of society, really. So do you look at institutions? I mean, obviously it would be extremely difficult for you to start doing a sort of not family planning as such, but you know, I've seen on a number of occasions high school girls and lads as well with these electronic babies, where they have to take this electronic baby home for a week, and then it's obviously not exactly like having an actual baby, but it gives them an indication of the level of time that they're going to have to spend looking after children. And I think it should be more incumbent on or placed more on teaching young men these are the situations that you're going to have to deal with if you get somebody pregnant, and you need to take the responsibility to think, actually, I don't want to be looking after a baby when I'm much rather be out with my friends.
Yeah. Certainly I've heard the views of our panelists today, and maybe you are struggling with some of the issues that we have discussed today. Please don't feel you're on your own. Please get in touch with us. You can do so at info@kirkleeslocaltv.com or on Twitter at The Weekly Windup. Please get in touch with us. Well, that's all we've got time for today, but on next week's show, we've got organ donation, the government's ability to push these emergency law, and the recent case of a blogger fined for a negative review of a restaurant. Are they taking away our human rights and our British rights as citizens? Please tune in next week, and may I say thanks to my guests, and watch us again. This is Kirklees Local TV saying goodbye.